So we're going to get the next panel started. To say the past few years have been challenging is an understatement, and writers like all of us have dealt with redefining a sense of normalcy while using their craft to cope. Please join me in welcoming our next panelists, Kate Racculia, author of Tuesday Mooney Talks to Ghost. Greg Galloway, author of Just Thieves. Coco Ma, author of Shadow Frost. Amanda Parrish Morgan, author of the forthcoming book Stroller. Libby Waterford, author of the Never a Bride series. And Mallory O'Mara, author of Girly Drinks. This panel is moderated by children's book author Stephen Bowling. Welcome our panelists.
Okay. I think, I apologize to the panel. I think they didn't know what to do with me. So they said, let them talk about the pandemic. But the pandemic is one of the bizarre times in history. And all of a sudden you're writing, pandemic comes up, you find yourself sequestered. How did that affect your writing? And I'll give you an example. I discovered that I like bourbon as much as I do scotch, and it really affected my writing. So how did it, Kate, you want to go first?
Oh, boy. Can you hear me? Is that on? Oh, wait. Oh, now it's on. Now it's on. So weird. I was writing a book when it all went down. Picture it. March 2021. 2020, no, God, see, I lost a year. I was writing a book, and I had just been on like a retreat. I turned 40 in 2020. It was like, this is my year. And I sent a section of it to my agent. She's like, you could keep going. And I was like, have you watched the news? Like, I need something to hold on to right now. And she's like, you could keep going, or you could do something else. So, it's so weird. I almost feel like that time is kind of like a smear. I was working at my local public library in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Shout out to the Bethlehem Area Public Library. And I threw myself into that, and my writing kind of took a back seat, because I was like, I need to feel like I'm doing something that helps someone other than me right now, today. Flash forward a year, and I unquit my day job. I went back to work full time. Pro tip, don't quit your day job. And since then, I started writing another book that I'm about halfway done with that is implicitly a response to the pandemic. It's actually a book that's set at an event very much like this. It's a festival that brings people together, set in July 2019, for obvious reasons. And so I think the pandemic affected my writing in a way where it made me stop and figure out, why are you doing this? What do you care about? Don't waste time not writing or doing something you don't care about. And take time and figure out what it is you really want to spend your life doing. And maybe right now, that is not writing this book. That is like helping your community. So yeah, that's how it affected my writing.
Greg?
So I have a twofer. So Just Thieves was sent by my agent out to a list of editors that he was very confident would appreciate the book, and that was sent out on March 13th, 2020. So all these editors were in New York City. About a week later, I checked in with him, and I said, just our luck that we sent this out during a global pandemic, and he said, I thought this was your plan all along. So I sort of put my head down and figured I would pick up on a novel that I had started before, which was about a group of high school kids who are children of a family of preppers who are preparing for the end of the world that they think is coming. And I thought, there is no way in hell I want to write about this now. So my writing came to a complete standstill in that regard. And luckily we were in a rural community in Connecticut, so our life didn't change that much. But, you know, my mother got COVID, my brother got COVID, all before the vaccine. And, you know, it really sort of took a lot to get out of that. And I ended up writing some nonfiction things, went back and wrote some pieces about the United States before the polio vaccine and how people responded to that and the fear that was going on in the country during the polio vaccine. And for me, that was a way to get back to writing fiction. Luckily, I think that the book about the preppers might be dead, and I moved on to something else. And that writing, for whatever reason, I think avoidance I had set sort of pre 9/11. And now I realize a lot of the issues in that book make more sense post-pandemic, and I've sort of started rewriting that and putting it more contemporary. And I think all of that is a function of sort of coming through this, however far we've come through this on the other side.
Coco, you were at university at the time, so how did it?
I was
still
indeed.
Are.
Well, so I still had classes. They were moved online, and because I was doing grad school at the time, we actually did have the opportunity to stay on campus, but all the undergrads got kicked out. So campus was very empty, and all the classes moved on to Zoom, which was kind of shocking and weird, and yeah, but I was so unproductive for, you know, the first part of the pandemic. But I did have a secret weapon, which was that I had a book due, but I also had another book that I wanted to write that wasn't the book that was due. So I think in a way, the unproductiveness was kind of, it lost out to my desire to write this secret book that I wasn't supposed to be writing. So yeah, and that book is coming out next year now, so that's really fun.
I guess I could sort of speak to two ways that the pandemic affected my writing. The first is just logistical. I think like a lot of parents of young kids, my kids at the time were in kindergarten and preschool, and my husband's a high school teacher, so he was teaching on Zoom all day, and we sort of came up with a schedule where I had from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. to do things. So I knew myself well enough to know that if I didn't write and go for a short run every morning, I would actually go crazy. So I was more regimented then than I am, you know, in a weird way now when I have, you know, my kids are back in school, and I just almost felt like it was medicinal that I had to write every morning. It sort of, for the first time in a long time, separated writing from professional goals and was more like, this is a part of self-care. And just that quiet early morning time came to feel really sacred, you know, amidst everything that felt so frightening otherwise. And then the other thing, as I was listening to you all speak, I was realizing that in ways I didn't quite realize the pandemic affected what I wanted to write about. I had, you know, I think like all writers, certain topics that I come back to a lot, but I started thinking explicitly about care and the value of caregiving and caretaking, and writing a lot about that, thinking about teaching and parenting, but in a way I think that the pandemic brought into focus. And then I'm working on now a novel that's set after a natural disaster, a fictional one, but I think that a lot of the questions everyone is mentioning, thinking about a community in crisis, that sort of, you know, I've been lucky that for most of my life I've had stability in my day-to-day, and so this was kind of my first experience seeing how daily life can be upended, and that definitely shaped my writing.
Like Amanda, I had small kids at home, and fall of 2019, I sent my younger son to kindergarten, so I had both in school for the first time, and then it lasted a few months, and then there was a screech and everybody was back home, which was a really huge adjustment, but it actually did, I think, make me more productive. So I didn't really have a time when I felt like I couldn't write. I was actually more motivated to carve out that time because everything felt so pressed, you know, in on me that I had been thrust into this role that I wasn't expecting of full-time caregiving all day long, every day. So I actually was more productive because I also had previously mostly been writing alone at the library or in a coffee shop, and being at home, I was able to reach out to other writers who were stuck at home and do Zoom sprints with them, and my writing life actually expanded during the pandemic because I had those virtual connections with other writers who across the country. So, so that was a big change as well. So it definitely, you know, to look on this to the bright side, it was an opportunity to really change my writing style and my writing community, expand it. It's great.
I think for me, I went through the same thing that a lot of people did, where I was like, why does any of this freaking matter? You know, in 2020, writing is a very isolating, lonely job most of the time, and that is sort of alleviated by the fact in normal times that we get to go out and we get to meet readers and talk to other writers and like really connect with that community. And suddenly I was like in my house in Los Angeles and by myself, and I was like, why does any of this matter? You know, I'm not making a vaccine. Why aren't I should be out like punching racists or something. Like I'm a historian. I was like, I was writing the world history of women drinking, and I was like, why does anyone care about this? Why does this matter? And it was my friend Bria, who me and Bria are going to be doing a big event tonight. She said, Mallory, what is everybody doing right now during the pandemic? Binging stuff. They are reading tons of things. They are watching tons of things. The stories, whether they are fiction or nonfiction, are literally keeping people sane right now. And it was like the moment in the movie where the music swells, and it was not very exciting because I was like in my dirty sweatpants, and I was like, yes, I too matter. What I do matters. But it took me a really long time to get to that point. And I think there's a lot of people who were new writers, and all writers, whether you have never written a book or you've written 15,000, we're struggling to like, okay, well, why are we doing this? Why aren't we out like in the streets helping people? Like you said, it was really tough, but it brought me back around to realizing how important the written word is, and now you can tear my writing career from my cold dead fingers.
So there's not as much external stimuli, I would think, during the pandemic. And so the question is, where did you get inspiration? And also, were you more creative or less creative? And I remember personally that I would, I'd write for half a day, and I'd come back the next day, and I'd look at it, and I'd go, wow, this really sucks. This is really bad. But how did you find your creativity?
Do you want me to start? So I just kind of like the idea of like just doing it for self-care, Amanda. Like I was writing that way too. It was like, I just need to have something to do. I need to go. I was writing the book that kind of went nowhere. It was set in the late 90s with teenagers. It was very horny. Like obviously such a quarantine mood to write a super horny teen like novella that is unpublished. You can read it if you want. Anyway. But I look back now and I see some of the things that I did with my friends. Like I lived in Boston for 11 years. I have really good friends in the area. We used to watch terrible movies and do like riff tracks, like Mystery Science Theater together. And we started doing that on Zoom, where we would like sync our TVs and like watch terrible, terrible movies and some great movies. We watched a lot of early John Carpenter, which is great. And we would just watch them on Zoom together every Friday night for like 18 months. And when I went to write the book that I'm working on now, it is about movies, right? And I see that like the way that I stayed in touch with my people and kept myself sane and kept myself like binging, like watching, like art was what saved me and so many people. I was seeding the land by watching so many terrible, terrible movies. So that was one thing. And also just slowing down and reading books and doing a lot of yoga and trying to be still, right? And not, where's my phone? I don't even know where my phone is right now. It's in my bag. Not scrolling was also a thing I did.
It's sort of trying to compartmentalize the news or do something with the news creatively. And for me, as I mentioned, it was a lot of nonfiction writing, and I ended up doing, reading a lot of diaries from the plague years and seeing how societies talked about that and how they dealt with that. And as I said, that sort of brought me to polio, and did a lot of research about grade schools and high schools in Connecticut before the polio vaccine, and which high schools and grade schools were part of the test programs where they got early rollouts of the vaccine. And as I said, for me, writing that nonfiction stuff sort of helped me deal with what was going on, and then led me to go back to fiction in a weird way.
Kate, I know you said that you were avoiding scrolling. I did not have that kind of self-control.
We did what we had to do.
So, I mean, obviously, there's a reason why you were avoiding that. And I ended up getting so frustrated, and there were a lot of feelings of grief and turmoil and fear and anxiety. And I think that, in a way, those really strong emotions kind of overwhelmed me, and I ended up wanting to find some kind of way to manifest that through writing. The book I was working on in secret didn't exactly have anything to do with COVID explicitly, but there were a lot of very common themes, such as isolation and death, lots of death, and monsters. Perhaps that was a metaphor for COVID itself, but so I think that for me, inspiration kind of just came out of that need to do something and need to kind of release those feelings, and
One thing I noticed, I don't know if, I guess we all had this experience in the very early days of COVID, no public places were even open, like even outdoors. I live in Fairfield, which is one town north of here, and there were caution tape like blocking off the access to the beach or to these tiny little green patches of grass, or in all the trails. And I remember on May 1st, all those spaces opened up again, and it was like, now I can go through the beach parking lot and I can go on this little trail. So at the time, it just felt like so wonderfully, like that itself was very stimulating, because I had really only been in our house and our yard and in the streets immediately around it. So I started to get really interested in noticing things about just Connecticut, about Fairfield County. I grew up here, so it's a pretty familiar place to me, and I felt like I would have said I knew the area pretty well, but returning to places I'd spent time as a kid, or just slowing down, as a lot of people have said, and making what would have ordinarily been something that I didn't even think to stop as I passed, making that itself like, an excursion or a destination.
That's so interesting, because I'm not from this area, and so I definitely felt cut off from being able to explore. I feel like I lost 2 years of just learning about where I live, because there was no place to go, or we were discouraged from going out. And I also felt very cut off from my family, which is in California. So not seeing them for 18 months was kind of what Kate said about doing something that reminds you, like with your friends, that reminds you of better or pre-times. So I found myself watching a lot of comfort TV, and I actually got really into podcasts, binging podcasts about, that were like show rewatch podcasts, which informed my new series, which is about a reboot of a teen soap that comes back to the small town where they shot the show, and there is podcasters who follow the whole thing. So definitely my creativity was informed by all of those comfort binges, for sure.
Is it Dawson's Creek?
Dawson's Creek was very pivotal, yes.
I was like, wait a minute.
Yep.
So I write women's history, which normally means that I'm just like filled to the brim with rage all the time. But I was really surprised during the pandemic to find that working on my my history of women drinking, girly drinks, was very soothing. History is very soothing in a crisis because you're like, oh yeah, this crap happens like all the time. And just like reading about these it sounds so morbid, but like we were all morbid in 2020. I mean, look at me, I'm always morbid. I was like, oh, this stuff is like reading about these women who had gone through these like natural disasters, these political disasters, economic disasters, and just like still found ways to make booze and like party. I was like, wow, we can do this. You know, Los Angeles was a wicked dark place to be in 2020. It was pretty grim. And just imagining that, you know, for thousands of years, women were still making it through stuff. It was the first time I was ever not mad writing. I was like, oh, I mean, I still was a little mad, but I was like, yeah, okay, we can, even though things seem awful, we're probably gonna keep going. Something will turn around. Something good's gonna happen. And here we are, you know, we're back in person and it happened. And so, yeah, I just used those drinking ladies as inspiration to not wanna like walk into the sea.
So the traditional ways to market yourself, to meet readers, or the libraries are closed, bookstores are closed. What did you do to market? How did you get new readers?
Cry.
What did you do?
I mean, so Tuesday Mooney Talks to Ghosts came out in October 2019, just like under the wire. So grateful. I had like a little baby tour and got to like see people in person, and then we all know what happened. So I think I did more Zoom events, right? Like whether it was about Tuesday Mooney or whether I was interviewing people were reaching out, they were looking for moderators to do Zoom things. And like, I know as like an audience member, I got to see more authors talk about their books because I mean, I live in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. It's a great town. It's cool. You should come visit. But it's not Brooklyn, right? It's not Boston. It doesn't have that same kind of like tour stop, you know, culture, book tour stop culture. And I got to see more things. So I think kind of, I wasn't on social as much, but participating in these sort of like Zoom events that people were so excited to do, especially I think in the early parts of the pandemic when plans that were in person pivoted, right? Like so that's kind of what I did. And then I went into a hole.
I was just thinking, I wonder how much, I mean, I don't know what everyone else's experience has been with other writer friends or agents or editors who were based in New York previously, but I was just thinking my agent left the city permanently during COVID and actually lives in Connecticut now, but I was sort of starting to wonder if there's a way that a long-term mixing up of writing community where, to your point about those traditional Brooklyn, Boston, whatever, the tour stops, not just because of Zoom events, but actually if continued remote work in some cases might spread out the writing community a little bit, which I personally think would be a good thing.
Yeah.
And a welcome change. So yeah, not just the access through Zoom. I had the same experience of getting to go to a friend's book launch in Pittsburgh that I probably would not have traveled to Pittsburgh to see. But also just more generally sort of finding pockets of writing communities that might have once been concentrated in Manhattan or Brooklyn or LA.
And taking classes online too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I taught some writing classes online and that was really great. And it was through Grub Street, which is based in Boston, but they were from all over the country.
And it's interesting that the people in publishing who stayed in New York City understandably had a totally different perspective than the people who decamped to Connecticut. And the people in Connecticut were much more productive and saw the world through a different lens. The people in New York, again, you know, they were afraid to go out on the street, go in the subways, those types of things. Publishing at its worst is a very reactionary business. And you know, I remember getting an email from my publisher probably late March that, you know, I thought it would be an email, hey, we've been around for 150 years, where we've been through the Depression, we've been through this, we're still around. Instead it was, we don't know what's going to happen, we're going to take this day by day, which is sort of not the greatest shot of optimism. And then what they discovered was people are reading during the pandemic. And holy shit, maybe we can sell some books. So then there was a rush to try to publish books. And then, you know, there was also some unrest. George Floyd happened, and then there was another catastrophe that they had a crisis of conscience and then rushed one way. And it took, it was sort of being on the deck of a listing ship for a while, and you weren't quite sure whether it was going to sink or stay afloat. And it was sort of very interesting that, to come out the other side. And, I think I had to wait 10 months for the book to be sold, and then another 8 months for it to be published. And, every given day you weren't quite sure where they were going to come down on. Is this going to happen? Is this not going to happen? Are they going to be in business? Are they not going to be in business? And, for any kind of stability, mental or otherwise, it was a difficult time. And, much of that is understood, as I said, for the people who were there in New York trying to make these decisions.
Yeah, I think I think you guys were mentioning the binging kind of episodes that people went through. And I think reading was definitely a big part of that, in addition to like television and baking and sleeping. And so I do remember also my agent said to me like, hey, like we have no idea what's gonna happen, just take it easy, like try to refill your creative well while, chaos is going on. And then-
Get some rest.
Yeah, get some rest for once, which is very contrasting to what my old agent said. He said, you can rest when you're in your grave, which was really nice to say to a 16-year-old, but anyway. Yeah, that's fine. So I don't have any trauma. Anyway, so I think that was so wonderful that people were, someone said yesterday, they asked a question about like how to get young people off their screens and off TikTok and stuff like that. And I feel like a lot of people did start to read more, and bookshops where like people would just go in and buy a book. It was like no social interaction required. Curbside pickup was a wonderful thing, and I think should still be instated for the rest of the time. But so I also finally got a chance to read a big pile of books that I had purchased and promised I would read one day and never did. But I got through that. In terms of like, doing events and stuff, you and I were talking last night about like concerts and stuff, because I also am a pianist, and book events, of course, were pretty easy to do on Zoom because you could talk. But with performing, like you would play something and then you would only hear like 2 of the notes and then the rest was silent or something like that. And what was really wonderful was that a lot of companies like Zoom were kind of forced to reckon with the current day and like how to develop their technology in a way to allow performances and music to be more accessible online and those sorts of concerts. And so as a result, I got to perform for, people who couldn't leave their homes even before COVID, and people from other cities and, around the world. And I think that was really wonderful. Of course, there were some flaws. I remember one very particular performance. I finished playing and everyone was on mute and they were clapping, but I didn't realize they were clapping, and I just thought they hated me. So that was fun. But yeah, it's been really good.
I did not try to get any new readers during the pandemic. COVID broke me. I mean, I didn't get COVID during 2020, but because, at the start of it, what happened is we were all like, oh my God, we're gonna do all the virtual events. You all remember the first few months of the pandemic, there was like a virtual event every night. People that you hadn't talked to in years were like, we got a Zoom. And you're like, I don't even know who you are. And then all of a sudden there was a ton of Zoom burnout. And I remember talking to my publicist and a friend of mine in the publishing industry, and they were like, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to people are reading, but we don't know how to reach them anymore. And I read this essay by an author who was talking about how, and I'm talking to any aspiring writer in the audience, I think right now especially, there is a massive amount of pressure. Like, you want to be an author? You got to get on TikTok. You got to get on Twitter. You got to be on Instagram. You got to make reels. You got to take videos of yourself. You do not have to do that.
Preach.
Okay? And I'm really lucky. I have a book podcast, and that is really, really helpful for me to find new readers. But I like doing that. I don't like TikTok. I don't want to do that. And, I think for the first few months, there was so much pressure for all of us to make digital content, do things, and like take videos of yourself doing a little dance. And I just didn't want to do that, because really the thing is, unless you were a self-published author, if you're a traditionally published author, it is not your job to market your book. That's why they get a bazillion %, oh my gosh. That's why they get, a large chunk of your money is to market your book. But there's so much pressure to do it yourself. And you're like, I remember I was like, I gotta write my newsletter more. I gotta post more on Twitter. I gotta post cool videos where you can't see my dirty sweatpants on Instagram. And then finally it just broke. It was when I had that conversation with my publicist, one, and then also my best friend who's also in publishing. She was like, we just don't know what to do. And then they started consolidating the virtual events. Like instead of doing a virtual tour, you do like 1 or 2 big events, which is great. And I hope we keep virtual things. But I was like, oh, we're all just throwing spaghetti against the wall. Yep. Maybe I should at least let the people who are getting paid to throw spaghetti against the wall do it, and I will work on my book. And I took a Twitter hiatus for a while. I just stopped trying to do that. And so I just want to say to all the writers out there, like, just write your book, okay? Don't worry about trying to reach new people. Like, if you've never published anything, you're working right now, like, you're naming the band before you've even written any songs. So just, the pandemic broke me and I was like, screw it. I'm not gonna be cool anymore. I don't care. I'll let the people who get paid to do this. And yeah, I only do stuff that is fun and I enjoy it.
Libby, did you want?
I am indie published, so it is my job to market my books. And
A bunch of cool TikTok dances. I'm gonna be so impressed right now.
I have a TikTok, but I've never posted anything to it, so don't ask me about TikTok. I think everybody's answers were amazing, and I would just add that I think that it is, the accessibility of the Zoom events for people who would not be able to otherwise attend events, I think is really amazing, and that we should keep that going for those people for accessibility, yeah.
Yes.
If anyone has any questions, there's a microphone in the back.
Hi, so I'm one of the people that actually helps to manage events like these. I work for
Thank you.
You're welcome. So
You are much appreciated.
what my question is, what was, if any, during the pandemic when everything was virtual, or what was the most creative event that you were like, I am so jazzed to do this, I'm so excited? Was there anything that like stood out to you as particularly interesting from the author and presenter point of view?
I have one favorite.
So I don't know if it was 2021 and 2020 to me are just like one run-on year, and it's very hard for me to remember which happened in which, so I can't, either was October 2020 or 2021, I don't remember. But my friend Maggie Daguda Hall released a graphic novel called Squad with artist Lisa Sturl, and me and my friend Sarah Gailey, who's also an author, to do the launch of that graphic novel, we did a virtual event, but instead of doing a reading, which is hard for a graphic novel, there's children here. We played a game of, because it's called Squad, and it's about teen girl werewolves who eat people, and it came out in October, so we did a horror-themed, literary-esque hug, marry, kill. Smooch, marry, kill. There you go. And it was so fun. We had such a blast with it. And because it was very different, because it's hard, some of us were talking before, it's really hard to do a reading on Zoom, and some authors are incredible at it. I don't do readings. It's very difficult to gauge the temperature of the audience. You can't tell if anyone's laughing. Like, you just can't tell. So instead of trying to do any of that, we just had a blast. And because we were having so much fun and making each other laugh and we were talking about stuff that was thematic to the book, and both Maggie and Lisa, worked into some of their answers, worked stuff about the book into there, but people loved it. I still get people who come to signings or they're like, I saw that event that you did with Maggie and Lisa and Sarah, and it was so much fun. It was like the funnest event that I did during Zoom. So I think maybe separating from the idea that you need to promote your book as hard as possible. Because when you do, it's funny because we are doing an event like this right now. What people want to find out, and you can disagree with me as the audience, they just want to know if you're cool and fun and an interesting person. There's a million other places to find out about books. There are not many other places to find out about authors. So this seems very simple advice, but just super fun stuff like that might seem a little silly, but actually gets people really engaged.
While you were talking, I thought of something when you mentioned graphic novels. Since my kids are young, actually, they're the kids back there. But they...
Sorry.
No, I didn't mean it like that. I don't know if anyone else who has younger kids remembers in the early days of the pandemic, the children's author Mo Willems was doing these drawing lessons, and it was so moving. I mean, I would have cried about absolutely anything, and from like March 1st until, I don't know, still, I guess, yeah, exactly. But it was, I think, around lunchtime, and he would just do a quick little drawing lesson. So, I mean, I don't draw, and I don't have visual components of my books, but I was just thinking how my book's coming out in October, and as part of the sort of publicity for it, one of the things I've been trying to do is propose events that have an interactive, like a workshop component. In my case, like a prompt-based writing workshop or a generative writing exercise or something, instead of just me reading, even though I completely could read from my book since it doesn't have a visual element, that wouldn't translate. So that's something not necessarily just online, but in person too. I think seeing how the Zoom events often were interactive and asked the audience or gave the audience like almost a gift of time to create, made me think about how, as a writer myself, I would love to go to an event, even if 5 minutes of it were devoted to thinking or brainstorming or writing a haiku or something. Anything like that would be
Something
really
to make it not feel like a work Zoom.
Yeah.
Really is the thing.
Right.
So many of us spent all day on work Zooms, and then it was after like a month of like frenzy Zoom in a virtual event, it was very hard to differentiate sitting at my desk, having a business meeting from sitting at my desk and watching someone talk. So I think, yeah, interactive for sure.
And trivia too. That was I was part of an online Zoom trivia league, and you need like a DJ, right, to run it, but just online events where you are participating in your space in some way and not just receiving information. Super fun.
One last question. I have a question as a reader and a writer, I suppose. But when I write, we had talked about this before. I see a movie as I'm writing. I see it. I picture it. I write kids' books. I see the cartoon. Do you do that? How do you write? I know you do mostly nonfiction, I think, right?
So more of a documentary.
Documentary. But do you see it in your head that way, like a movie?
Absolutely. Yeah. Tuesday Mooney Talks to Ghosts is my version of the Goonies meets Indiana Jones. And I was like, and I have done screenwriting too. So I was like, break it like it's a 3-act structure and you're going to have set pieces and that, I mean, it was intentional in the project of the book, but I'm just a super duper visual person. So yeah, it's always movies, always. And I love books too.
Greg, do you see yours as a movie?
Sometimes. Oftentimes it's conversations. So it's sentences that don't necessarily have a visual to them. But oftentimes I'm inspired by, it's like a scene, mise en scène, and that I see vividly and then write to that. And then other times it really is sort of a stream of dialogue and then trying to think about who's having this conversation.
When you have that stream of dialogue, do you picture them in your head talking and then write about it? Or
Later.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes it really is just sort of voices, and initially oftentimes it is a conversation, and then I have to think about who's having this conversation, and then once I get the characters involved, then they, not to be too wacky. But then sometimes they speak to me, you know, and I hear them talking, and their action comes out of the conversation that they have and the conversation they have with each other. And you know, I think part of that is that audio quality. So it's like I'm attracted to the sound of their voice, the words that they're saying, and the visual comes later. And sometimes it's the reverse.
So for me, the visual definitely comes first. I think that was definitely my starting point for my next book, Nightbreaker. And it was this image of Times Square blacked out. And that led to this kind of inspiration of a version of Manhattan that dies when the sun goes down and all of the lights go out and all of the power goes out. And I would love to go into screenwriting in the future. I think that's so cool. And so I also, of course, as any author probably ever, would love for my work to be turned into a pilot or a feature or something like that. So then I was like, maybe I should do it myself. So I started working on a pilot for Nightbreaker. And at first it was obviously complete rubbish, as I think any pilot usually starts off as being and sometimes ends up being at the end. But no comment on that. So I realized that I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. So I went and I did a ton of script studying, and I was breaking down scripts and like reading like one paragraph or one page and then watching the end result that ends up getting released and seeing what sorts of changes had happened. And it really allowed me to kind of cut down on extraneous dialogue, these kind of like to fix the pacing, honestly. It really actually changed how I thought about writing. And so actually I worked on the pilot for Nightbreaker, and I found all these places where the pilot was so much more exciting than the book I'd written. And so I thought, I don't really want to go back and change like a bunch of chapters. And then I thought about it again. I was like, well, I better go do it. So that was really interesting to me. But I definitely see everything I write as like a cinematic picture in my head. And hopefully one day that'll translate to a pilot or a TV show or a movie.
I'm not very visual, to be honest, which is maybe a weakness that I have as a writer, too. My mom and I were talking the other day about Elizabeth Strout and an interview my mom had read with Elizabeth Strout where she mentioned, like, a scene kind of fully fledged would come into her mind, and she would sit down and write that scene and then end up with a big collection of scenes and then sort through the scenes to see, is this a book? What order did these need to be in? What needs to be filled in? This was just a few days ago, but in the days since when I've been writing, I've been trying to think about like something that one of my college writing instructors always used to say was go where the energy is, meaning like if you're excited about some scene you thought of, even if it's gonna come in, 30 chapters from now, just go write that right now. So I've been trying to think, okay, well I do have an image in my head of a family having an argument in a living room or whatever it is, and then just write that and don't worry about the connective tissue yet. So maybe not quite like a movie. I fall asleep during movies really easily. I don't watch a lot of movies. So maybe that's why I don't think that way, but a modified visual, maybe.
I am also not super visual to start with. I hear the dialogue a lot and start with that, and my books are very dialogue heavy, and I have had beta readers say, but what do they look like? What are they wearing? And so that's stuff I have to go in and add later, yeah.
As a history writer, I'm more like, that scene where the detective is trying to catch the serial killer and there's a whole wall of stuff and it's all connected by red yarn. That's kind of what's in my brain when I'm writing. I'm trying to think of this person and the context of what they were doing and the time period and all the other, 5 million things. And it's sort of like that Always Sunny in Philadelphia meme where he's like, has the whole room looking like that, but it's in my head. Like that's kind of what it looks like. It's not a sexy movie or documentary. I wish it was sexier, but it is not.
I write children's books, so I have, talking cows and birds, talking to each other, so it's all swimming around in my head. And I think they were running a little late, so they wanted us to finish, and I believe there's going to be book signing over there. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See, there's plenty to talk about with the pandemic.